Today I am making all-purpose baking mix. Some people buy something called Bisquick to cook with, and sometimes I will use Trader Joe's buttermilk pancakes in all-purpose baking mix. But sometimes I like to make my own. A lot of the store-bought baking mixes have chemicals or extra ingredients in them that aren't healthy, and I would like to make my own healthier mix. So here is how you do that. You'll need a large bowl, and you will need a sifter for mixing your dry ingredients. Our first ingredient is 4 cups and 1/4 cup, so 4 1/4 cups of flour. Now our sifter will not fit all of that flour at once, so we're going to put about half of the flour in. The next ingredient is baking powder, and I have 4½ teaspoons of baking powder. And that's already measured out. So there's our 4½ teaspoons of baking powder. And 1½ teaspoons of salt. So here is regular salt. We'll add 1½ teaspoons of regular salt. This is called cream of tartar. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar. So let's get that sifted. This baking mix is very easy to make, and it will last for about 3 or 4 months in your pantry. You want to store it in a dark cabinet away from sunlight. Now the next ingredient is dry milk, instant dry milk. And I'm using 3/4 cup of instant dry milk. And we're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. So we will sift the remaining dry ingredients into our bowl. I want to get all of the milk through the sifter so that it's finely into fine little powder instead of thick granules. We want everything to mix well. You can see how it's finer there. I'm just going to use a spoon to help the rest of this go through. So I'm just going to stir our dry ingredients. They've all been sifted and nicely mixed. And we have one last ingredient, and that is shortening. And I use shortening sticks because they're easy to measure. You can use regular shortening or butter-flavored shortening. It doesn't matter which type that you use. 1 stick of shortening equals 1 cup, and we need 1 1/8 cup of shortening. We're going to add 1 whole stick. There's 1 stick of shortening. And then we need 2 more tablespoons of shortening. That will be 1/8 of a cup. There we go. Now the recipe calls for a tool called a pastry blender to cut the shortening into the flour, and that is one way to mix these ingredients. But if you don't have a pastry blender, you can just use 2 knives and cut the shortening into the flour mixture with the 2 knives. So either way will work, with a pastry blender or with 2 knives. So I'm going to finish using my pastry blender. Now the pastry blender or 2 knives will do a very good job of mixing the shortening into the flour ingredients, but it will not mix it all of the way. So we're going to cut it in as well as we can, and then to finish mixing it and to make it resemble cornmeal crumbs, we'll need to use our hands and fingers to finish the mixing. So kind of messy, but it's worth it. This is a great baking mix to be able to do on a budget and to be able to make without all of the chemical ingredients. So you may want to use regular shortening that doesn't have butter flavor in it. But this is a very economical, good mix to make. It's one of the ingredients in my Mexican pie, and it also is the ingredient in several other crustless quiche recipes that I will be publishing in the future. So now we've cut the shortening in. Now we need to finish mixing with our hands. The heat from your fingers and hands does help the shortening to blend better, more thoroughly into the flour, and helps us to mix it more finely. Also very important, I disinfect and clean all of my cooking surfaces before I cook, and I thoroughly wash my hands and scrub under my fingernails before I handle any food. Very, very important. So you can see that the mixture is starting to look a bit like cornmeal or coarse crumbs. There's still a few larger pieces of shortening, so I want to make sure that all of that gets very well mixed and blended into our flour mixture. And like I said, I have a lot of crustless quiche recipes that are inexpensive and easy to make, and they all use baking mix, so it's nice to be able to make your own at home. Now you'll need an airtight container to store your baking mix in. I have a container right here, and I've made a label on top that says baking mix. If you want to, you can also put the date of the mix on there. And our mix is finished. It's ready to use. All I need to do is put it away in the container put it away in the cabinet, and then bring it out when I need to cook with it. So here's our container of baking mix. And put the lid on. Here's our container of baking mix, all ready to use for when we make Mexican pie or spiced pecan muffins. And I'll have a few other recipes that I share with you that also use this baking mix. Thank you very much for watching, and please remember to always season everything you do with love.